There's a strange feeling you get when you plant a seed. At first, it feels hopeful. You put the seed in the ground, you cover it, you water it, you stand there for a second like you've done something meaningful. And of course, the next day, it's still dirt. Obviously, nobody plants something on Tuesday and expects a plant on Wednesday. But after a little while, you start to wonder, really? Nothing yet? You water it again, you look closer, and then the dirt starts to feel like feedback, like maybe you planted it too deep. Maybe the soil is bad. Maybe this is why people who garden always seem to know things the rest of us don't know. And then you get tempted to dig a little, to check, to see if anything is happening underneath. But you can damage slow growth by constantly trying to verify it. And I think a lot of us do that with our souls. Am I better yet? Have I changed enough? Why do I still struggle? Why does this still feel slow? Hey, this is Jonathan, counselor at Sound Mind, professor at Living Faith Bible Institute, and a pastor here in Kansas City at Midtown Baptist Temple. And this is Sound Mind, where we take a deeper look at life through a biblical lens. Today, we are continuing in our series, The Places We Find Ourselves. We've talked about the desert when life feels dry. We talked about the storm when control comes apart. We talked about the waiting room when life feels stalled. And today, we're talking about the garden when life is growing slowly. And I think this is hard because the garden can be full of life and still feel painfully slow. You can be praying, trying, repenting, showing up, opening the Bible, having the conversations, going to all the meetings, and still feel like, why is this taking so long? Why am I not more patient by now? Why am I still anxious? Why does this old pattern still feel so familiar? And I think this is because slow growth is not the same thing as no growth. And sometimes the work God is doing is real before it feels obvious. All right, let's talk about it. One of the coolest parts of being a dad in this season of life is that my kids are still young enough to think that I am incredible. And I'm not so delusional to think that the window is not closing. I am very aware. I believe it's coming soon. There will be a day when they realize, oh, Dad is just a guy. He just knows where the snacks are and can reach the top shelf. But right now, I'm still kind of playing into it. I can do something mildly athletic and my kids think I'm the man. I'll be on the trampoline with my boys and I will cautiously revisit a backflip. And at this age, it feels less like recreation and more like a medical decision. But my boys now, they genuinely believe that I'm a ninja. Like, they will tell other people, my dad is a ninja, which obviously is not true, but I'm not correcting them too quickly. Or I'll pull my front wheel up on my bike for maybe like a second, barely a wheelie, just enough to concern my wife. And they're like, Dad, how did you do that? Like I'm placing in the X Games or something. Or I'll, lift their 50-pound body and slam them on the bed and they treat me like Hulk Hogan. And I'm not going to lie, it does wonders for my ego. I'll take it. But what's interesting is that sometimes that admiration for them, it turns into frustration because they see someone do some kind of cool trick or climb something high and they're confused why they can't do it too. Frustrated that their own body has not immediately figured out balance and timing and strength, coordination, confidence, and not panicking when the handlebars start doing their own thing, right? And my boys, they pick up things relatively quickly. So when they can't do something, it's not just frustrating for them. In that moment, they feel confused. Like, wait, why can't I do this? And that is a hard feeling because when you're used to catching on quickly, slow growth does not feel normal. It feels personal. It feels like something's wrong. So I'll find myself trying to explain growth to them in some very dad-like way. Yeah, bud, you're not bad at this. You just don't know how to do it yet. You have to practice. Your body has to learn. You're gonna fall a little bit before you get this, which is very easy to say when you're standing safely on the ground sipping a coffee, but I can see it on their face. They don't just want encouragement. They want the ability now. They want the finished version without having to live through the unfinished version. And man, honestly, I totally get that because I think a lot of us feel that way spiritually. We want patience without having to be slow. We want gentleness without having to notice how harsh we can be. We want courage without having to feel fear and obey anyway. We want forgiveness without having to walk through the pain of what happened. And we want maturity without having to be humbled by all the places we are still immature. And one of the hardest parts of growth is having to be in the middle of it. Not at the beginning where everything feels possible, not at the end where you can look back and see what God did, but in the middle, when you know enough to see the problem, but not enough to feel free from it. And that is where slow growth can feel so discouraging, because a lot of times growth doesn't feel like growth while it's happening. It actually feels like weakness or repetition. It feels like I thought I was past this. It feels like catching the same fear again and again, confessing the same pattern again, having the same conversation again, realizing you're still more defensive than you thought, more controlling than you want to admit, or more insecure than you'd like to be. And then shame comes in and says, see, nothing's changing here. That isn't always true. The presence of a struggle doesn't always mean the absence of growth. Sometimes early growth doesn't look like the struggle disappearing. A lot of times it just looks like noticing it sooner, naming it more honestly, recovering more quickly, confessing instead of hiding, asking for help instead of pretending you're fine. That may not feel impressive, may not feel like fruit at all, but it may be the beginning of something living. And that is why slow growth is so hard to recognize, because if we judge the whole process too early, we may call something dead that is actually growing slowly inside of us. So before we assume, I'm not changing, maybe we need to slow down and ask, what would growth even look like at this stage? Unfortunately, I don't think it looks like being done. I think it looks more like falling, getting back up, and learning how to keep going without deciding the whole thing is hopeless. Because slow growth is not the same thing as no growth. So if slow growth is not the same as no growth, then we need a better picture of how growth actually works. And that takes us to the scriptures in John chapter 15. This is one of those familiar passages in the Bible about spiritual growth. But before we get into the vine and the branches, I think we need to remember where Jesus was when he said all this. This is the night before the cross. Jesus has washed the disciples' feet. Judas had already left to betray him. Peter had been told that he is going to deny him. Jesus has been telling the disciples that he is going away. So this isn't Jesus sitting in some peaceful garden setting, giving a calm Devo thought to people who are having a pretty stable week. No, these men are troubled. They're super confused. They don't fully understand what is coming, but they can feel that something big is about to happen. Their world is about to get rocked. And in that moment, Jesus gives them a picture of growth. Not a machine, not a system, not a scoreboard, not a spiritual formula. He gives them a vine, a branch, fruit, pruning, abiding. I think this already helps us because a lot of times we come to spiritual growth looking for a shortcut. We want the thing that finally fixes it, the one insight, that one book, that one counseling session, that one verse. Maybe that one conversation where everything clicks and now we're just different. Now listen, I do believe God gives those kinds of moments. There are times where something gets named and you think, whoa, that's it. That is exactly what is happening inside of me. Those moments are real, but insight isn't the same thing as fruit. Insight can show me where growth is needed, but it can't replace actually abiding with Christ over time. Jesus says in John 15:1, I am the true vine, and my Father is the husbandman. That is where he starts. Not with what they need to produce, not with how impressive they need to be, not with how quickly they need to get it together. He starts with himself. I am the true vine. So before Jesus talks about fruit, he talks about source. And that is not where I naturally start when I am discouraged. Listen, when I feel like I'm not growing fast enough, I usually start with myself. What is wrong with me? Why am I still reacting like this? Why do I understand the pattern and still can't pull it together? Why am I not further along? And those are real questions. I mean, I'm not saying they're bad, but Jesus begins somewhere deeper. He says, I am the true vine. Spiritual growth, it doesn't start with me trying to squeeze fruit out of my own personality. No, it starts with life received from Christ. So then he says, and my Father is the husbandman. The Father is the gardener. He is the one tending to the vine. So your growth it's not random. It's not like God saves you and then leaves you sitting in the corner of the yard hoping something develops eventually. No, the Father is very involved. He sees the branch. He sees what is alive. He knows what is tangled up. He knows what is weak. He knows what needs support. And he also knows what needs to be cut back. This is comforting, I think, but also uncomfortable because the Father may cultivate us in ways we would not choose. Jesus says in verse 2, every branch in me that beareth not fruit, he taketh away. And every branch that beareth fruit, he purgeth it, that it may bring forth more fruit. That's the part that always hits me hard. Like the fruit branch still gets pruned also, not just the dead branch. Not just the branch that is obviously unhealthy, the fruitful branch. So pruning then it's not always punishment. Sometimes pruning is preparation. Sometimes the Lord, he's not cutting something back because you're useless. No. Sometimes he's cutting something back because he intends more fruit. But when you're in the middle of it, it rarely feels that clean. It actually more often feels like loss, like something familiar is being ripped apart, something comfortable, something you leaned on, something that made you feel safe or needed or productive or in control. And when that gets cut back, you don't usually think, yes, cultivation. You think, why is this happening? Why does this not work anymore? Why does obedience feel like it's costing me everything? Why am I being so exposed? And I think John 15 gives us a category we really need. Not every cut is rejection. Some cuts are care. And that doesn't make it painless. Pruning hurts. And honestly, pruning can make your life look less impressive for a little while. A freshly pruned plant doesn't look like it's thriving. It often looks smaller. It looks cut back. It looks like something was taken. And that is part of what makes it confusing. Sometimes the Father is making room for more fruit, but all we can see is what got removed. So then Jesus says in verse 3, "Now ye are clean through the word which I have spoken unto you." So the word, it's part of this cultivation. The word cleanses, and that sounds nice until the word starts touching something you did not really want to be touched. It starts showing you the way you have been harsh with people, or the way you call fear wisdom, or the way you keep calling avoidance peace because it sounds more spiritual than saying, I'm scared and I don't want to deal with this. And when the word does that, it stings. But that doesn't mean God is humiliating you. Conviction is not the same thing as condemnation, right? Sometimes the word is cutting into something because that thing has been choking out fruit. And then Jesus brings the heat. In verse 4, abide. That's the word. Stay connected to me. Remain with me. Continue with me. Don't try to live off yourself, because he says, as the branch cannot bear fruit of itself except it abide in the vine, no more can ye, except ye abide in me. And that is such a simple picture, but it cuts through so much of how I tend to think about growth. A branch doesn't bear fruit by obsessing over itself. It bears fruit just by simply abiding in the vine. I think a lot of us spend more time staring at the branch than abiding in the vine. We keep asking, am I better yet? Is this fruit? Why am I still struggling? Do I look different? Can other people tell? And okay, some self-examination is good, but if all I ever do is stare at myself, eventually, I'm not actually looking at Christ. I'm just becoming more aware of how unfinished I am. And I am fully aware of how unfinished I am. I don't need a daily documentary on it. And then Jesus says in verse 5, I am the vine. You are the branches. The order here is everything, right? He is the vine. We are the branches, but I reverse that emotionally all the time. I start acting like I am the vine and Jesus is there to help me manage the branches. I build the life, I carry the pressure, manage the outcomes. I try to keep people okay. I try to keep myself okay. I try to keep the image from falling apart. And then I ask Jesus to bless all the things I'm trying to sustain in my own strength. But Jesus doesn't say, you are the vine, I will help. No, he says, I am the vine. Ye are the branches. Then he says, he that abideth in me and I in him, the same bringeth forth much fruit. See, fruit comes from abiding. It's not a replacement for abiding. It's not proof that we finally matured beyond needing Christ. No, fruit is the result of life received. And then Jesus says, for without me, ye can do nothing. And that is humbling, because without Christ, I can still stay really busy. I can still look productive, still say the right words, still be needed, and still keep the machine running for a while. But that's not the same as fruit. You can look green for a little while on residual moisture, but spiritual fruit that glorifies the Father comes from Christ. Real fruit comes from real life, and real life comes from Him. So slow growth is not solved by frantic striving. The answer is not try harder to look fruitful. The answer is simply abide. Stay close to Christ. Let His words live in you. Stay under the Father's care. Let Him cleanse what needs to be cleansed. Let Him cut back what needs to be cut back. And keep coming back to the vine, because fruit is not forced. Fruit is born. And if Christ is the vine and the Father is the husband, then slow doesn't mean abandonment. It may mean you are being cultivated. There is another passage that helps us understand why growth can feel so slow while it's happening. Psalm 1. Psalm 1 is the front door to the book of Psalms. Before you get to all the prayers, the grief, the praise, the fear, the confessions, enemies, waiting, worship, and the whole emotional range of walking with God, Psalm 1 starts by describing the blessed life. And the picture, it gives us a tree. Psalm 1 says, blessed is the man that walketh not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor standeth in the way of sinners, nor sitteth in the seat of the scornful. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and in his law doth he meditate day and night. And he shall be like a tree planted by the rivers of water, that bringeth forth his fruit in his season. His leaf also shall not wither, and whatsoever he doeth shall prosper. What a beautiful passage. And listen, a tree is a pretty slow picture of growth. Nobody walks past a tree every morning and says, wow, look at that thing go. You don't stand in your yard watching a tree like it's putting on a show. Most days it looks exactly like it looked yesterday. But over time, something is happening. Roots are deepening, the trunk is strengthening, branches are stretching. Fruit eventually comes, but not because the tree is trying to impress everybody walking by. The tree is planted. That is where Psalm 1 starts to press on us. Before it talks about fruit, it talks about counsel. Blessed is the man that walketh not in the counsel of the ungodly. Counsel is not just someone formally giving you advice. Counsel is whatever is teaching you how to interpret your life. What do you do with fear? What do you do when you don't get what you want? What story do you tell yourself when change is slow? That counsel is coming from somewhere. It may come from Scripture. It may be coming from wise people who love the Lord. It may be coming from your church community, or it may be coming from your phone, scrolling at 11:30 at night, somehow still convinced that this is helping. And listen, I say that with too much personal familiarity because a lot of us meditate all the time. We just don't call it meditation, right? We call it worry or bitterness or comparison. Replaying the conversation in your head and finally coming up with the perfect thing you should have said 3 days ago is meditation too. It's just meditation pointed in the wrong direction. Psalm 1 says, "The blessed man is different. His delight is in the law of the Lord, and his law doth he meditate day and night." Meditation is slow attention. It's returning to the word and letting it settle. Letting Scripture correct the story you were starting to believe. Letting Scripture interpret your fear. Letting it become more familiar than the anxious loop you keep rehearsing. And that is slow work. You can't microwave meditation. I wish you could. I would love it if spiritual formation worked like leftovers. Put a verse in for 45 seconds, hit start, and come out with a fully renewed mind. Very efficient. But the Word works deeply. It works repeatedly. It works over time. And Psalm 1 says, "The person planted there bringeth forth his fruit in his season." That phrase is so helpful because it says in his season, not instantly, not constantly, not on demand, not according to the timeline I would have chosen. No, in season. Psalm 1 does not say the tree bears fruit every time someone walks by and demands proof. But I think a lot of us live like that. Like we owe everybody immediate evidence that we're growing. Like every week we need to prove that we're more patient now, more healed, more disciplined, more emotionally stable. And if we can't point to obvious fruit, we assume nothing's happened. But fruit comes in seasons, not on demand. There are root seasons, pruning seasons, seasons where all you are doing is learning to stay planted. There are seasons where the fruit isn't dramatic. It's just that you didn't leave. You didn't quit. You didn't run back to the old comfort as quickly. You opened the Bible again. You told the truth again. You came back to prayer after feeling distant from God. You let someone speak into your life instead of disappearing. And that might not feel like a harvest. Nobody's making a pie out of that just yet. But it may be evidence that the roots are alive. And that is the encouragement of Psalm 1. Hidden doesn't mean fake. Seasonal doesn't mean failed. A tree planted by rivers of water may not look impressive every day, but it is being nourished. So the question is not only, do I see fruit right now? The question is, where am I planted? What counsel is shaping me? What am I rehearsing? What am I letting feed my fears, my desires, my view of God, my view of myself? Because the planted life eventually becomes the fruitful life. Not because it panicked itself into fruit, but because it stayed near the water. This is where slow growth gets really personal, because the hard part is not just that change is slow. The hard part is what we start deciding about ourselves when change is slow. I see this every day in the people I get to work with in counseling, and I also see it myself. Someone will come in discouraged because they reacted in a way they thought they were past. Maybe they got defensive again, or maybe they shut down in a conversation. Maybe they avoided something they knew they needed to face, and their conclusion is usually something like, well, I guess I haven't changed. But sometimes what they really mean is the struggle is still here, and those aren't the same thing. We tend to measure growth by whether the struggle is gone, which I think makes sense. I mean, that's what we want. Nobody's signing up for a lifetime subscription to self-awareness. You want the thing to change. One of the first signs of growth is not typically it just disappearing. It's more like you being able to actually tell the truth about it. And that's a really big deal, because before, maybe you got defensive. You had to explain it away. You called it your personality or wisdom or just needing space, when really you were angry or scared or hiding or controlling or protecting yourself. But now you can name it. And I know that doesn't always feel like some massive victory. And in fact, it can often just feel worse, because now you see it. You're in the conversation and you feel yourself getting defensive. And part of you is watching it happen, like, there I go again, I'm doing it. Or maybe you're avoiding a text, and this time you can't fully convince yourself that you're just busy. You know what you're doing. That kind of awareness is uncomfortable, because you think, if I can see it, why am I still doing it? But insight doesn't mean the pattern is gone. Sometimes insight just means you can finally see the room you've been living in. And seeing the room is not the same thing as walking out of it. But it is often the beginning of no longer pretending the room is normal. That is growth. Not finished growth, obviously. Not clean or polished or put it on a mug growth. But real growth. And this is where I think we get tripped up again, because we assume real growth should feel cleaner than it ever does. But it's actually often more mixed. You apologize, but part of you still wants to defend yourself. You pray, but you still feel anxious. You tell the truth, but you want to manage how much truth people actually see. Or maybe you forgive, but the hurt doesn't immediately just evaporate. Now, this isn't an excuse for hypocrisy. I'm not saying just do whatever and call it complicated. We are all very capable of making our sin sound nuanced, but there is a difference between pretending and growing. Pretending wants to look complete, but growing is willing to be honest about being unfinished. And a lot of our sanctification, it happens before our emotions fully catch up. That doesn't automatically make it fake. That may be what abiding looks like in real time. It's not always this beautifully settled, emotionally resolved moment. Sometimes it just looks like, Lord, I'm here. I'm not where I want to be, but I'm not going to pretend anymore. Help me stay with you in this. And conviction plays a part in that. Sometimes when God shows us something, we interpret it as, I'm back at zero. But conviction is not always God saying, you're back at the beginning. Sometimes conviction is God showing you where He is still cultivating. The fact that something bothers you may be evidence that the Word is working. The fact that you grieve sin instead of defending it may be evidence of life. The fact that you want to prepare instead of despairing may be a little flower before fruit. So, slow growth feels threatening because we keep measuring only finished fruit, but God may be growing honesty, tenderness, quicker repentance. He may be growing a more truthful relationship to your own heart. And no, that may not look like the full harvest yet, but don't call it dead just because it's not finished. So when growth feels slow, I think one of the first things we have to remember is that growth is not something we control. It's something we participate in. Paul says it in 1 Corinthians 3:6. I have planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the increase. That is such a helpful way to think about this, because there are things that are ours to do. We plant, we water, we pay attention to what is growing. We pull weeds when we see them. We submit to pruning. We stay near the water, but we don't give the increase. That belongs to God. And I think that distinction is where a lot of us get worn out. We either try to control the increase, which makes us anxious and exhausted, or we act like because God gives the increase, there's nothing for us to do. But that's not how gardens work. You don't make the seed come alive, but you do have to put it in the ground. You can water it, you can keep it from getting choked out, you can pay attention to the soil, and you can show up again tomorrow. And spiritually, I think that starts with paying attention to what is being planted and watered in us. Psalm 1 talks about counsel before it talks about fruit. And that is such a big deal, because whatever you are planted near will feed you. So maybe one of the most practical questions is, what is feeding the way I see this season? Not just what do I believe, but what am I rehearsing? What am I returning to? What story am I watering every day? Because worry is meditation too. It's just meditation pointed in the wrong direction. And some of us are being discipled more by anxious loops in our head than by the Word of God. We keep watering fear and resentment and comparison. We water the version of the story where we are stuck, nothing is changing, and everyone else is doing better. And then we wonder why that is what keeps growing. And listen, that's not said to shame you. I know that place. I know what it's like to rehearse something until it starts feeling like wisdom, when really it's just fear with better vocabulary. So part of faithfulness in the garden is asking, what am I watering? Am I watering obedience, prayer? Or am I watering bitterness? Am I watering a fantasy version of escape? Am I watering the belief that I will never change? Because whatever you water is usually what gets stronger. And then when you see something that shouldn't be there, you pull the weed. This isn't some dramatic thing with a speech. It's just honesty. You confess, you name it, you bring it into the light. You say, Lord, that's envy, that's fear, that's control, that's me wanting relief more than obedience. And again, you don't have to turn that into a whole identity crisis. Sometimes pulling weeds is just part of tending the garden. You see it, you pull it up, you keep going. And then after that, I think we need to recognize the flowers. Not fruit yet, just flowers, early signs of life. Maybe you told the truth faster than you used to, or repaired sooner, or asked for help instead of hiding. Maybe you noticed the pattern before it completely took over. And you grieved sin instead of defending it. That doesn't mean you pretend fruit is fully formed. No, it's just that you stopped calling every living thing dead because it's not finished. Noticing a flower is not pretending you have fruit. It's refusing to call living things dead. And then after that, there's the pruning. We've already talked about this, but practically, you have to let pruning be pruning. You don't have to romanticize it, but pruning hurts. When God cuts something back or exposes something, He removes something or shows you something you can't unsee anymore, that can feel like loss. The fact that something is being cut doesn't mean God's against you. It may mean He's making room. So instead of only asking, why is this being taken? Maybe ask, what is God making room for? What comfort is losing its power? What coping strategy is not working anymore? What old way of getting through life is He exposing? What part of me is He inviting into deeper dependence? So then after all the pruning, right? What we need is to keep abiding in ordinary ways. This isn't something impressive. Open the passage, pray honestly, send a text, confess the sin, take the walk, show up to church, ask for help, go to bed instead of spiraling until 1 a.m. Because abiding is usually less dramatic than what we want and more necessary than we realize. It's not always a big spiritual moment. Sometimes it's just returning. Lord, I'm here. I'm not finished. I don't feel impressive. I still see things in my life that I wish were different. But I want to stay with you. That may not look like a harvest yet, but it is faithful. And in the garden, faithfulness often looks like planting and watering and pruning and staying near the water long enough to bear fruit in season. So what I'm saying today isn't look harder and prove that you are growing. No, maybe encouragement is simpler than that. Stay close to the vine. Stay planted near the word. Pay attention to what you are watering. Let the Father cut back what is choking out fruit, and don't despise the season just because it's slower than you wanted. Because slow is not the same as dead. Hidden isn't the same as absent. Unfinished is not the same as fake. And if you're in Christ, your growth is not being left up to you alone. The Father is the husbandman. Christ is the vine. The word is still cleansing. The waters are still there. And fruit comes in season. So don't call it dead just because it's not finished. Sometimes slow is how fruit is formed. If something in this episode gave language to a slow season that you're in, don't walk through it alone. Talk to someone you trust. Let someone who loves the Lord and loves you help you stay planted when you're having a hard time seeing fruit. And if you need more structured help, you can reach out to soundmind.live. We'd be glad to help you find biblical counseling near you. You can also follow along on Instagram and Facebook. Just search soundmind.live. We're always posting clips and resources and reels right in the middle of your week. And listen, if this episode helped you, if you feel a little watered, a little cultivated, a little sunshine from this episode, please rate and review the show. It really does help people find their way here. And if you're interested in more biblical conversations, check out the postscript. You can search the postscript wherever you listen. And if you are a future pastor or missionary, or you just want to know the Bible for yourself, do yourself a favor, check out Living Faith Bible Institute at lfbi.org. Thank you for listening today. Until next time, take care.